Hello, my name is Jarno Alanko, and this presentation is about matchtigs, a minimum plaintext representation of K-mer sets. So the goal in this work is to take a set of strings and produce a smaller set of strings which has exactly the same set of K-mers as the original strings. The set of K-mers in the input is called the spectrum of the input, and this smaller set of strings is called a spectrum preserving string set, or SPSS for short. This is useful because, for example, in metagenomics, a genome is often seen as just a bag of K-mers. So if we can find a smaller set of strings which has the same set of K-mers, we can use this smaller set as the basis for analysis, saving space and time, possibly. So here is an example where K equals 4. The set of input strings is on the left, and they are ACTTG and CTTGC. The spectrum of these strings is in the middle, so these are all the formers in these input strings. And on the right we have an SPSS of the input. So the string on the right contains every K-mer that is found in the input strings. So examples of spectrum preserving string sets, or SPSSs, are first unitigs. So if you take the de Bruijn graph of the input, the unitigs of the graph are automatically an SPSS. Now you can also do better than unitigs, so by better I mean smaller. You can try to combine the unitigs together. So there are two papers on this, one by Rahman and Medvedev and one by Brinda, Baim and Gucherov. And in these papers the authors take the unitigs and stitch them together, decreasing the number of strings and also making the total length of the strings shorter. So these give a smaller SPSS for the input, but not necessarily the smallest. So the open problem is, what is the smallest possible SPSS for a set of strings? The solutions mentioned above are just heuristics, and there is no guarantee that they are optimal. In fact, it's been conjectured that finding the smallest possible SPSS would be an NP-hard problem. But in this work, we show that this is not the case. So first, we reformulate the problem a bit. So we show that the problem of finding the smallest possible spectrum preserving string set is equivalent to finding the minimum number of paths to cover the de Bruijn graph of the input. So in this formulation, we are not allowed to repeat K-mers. So the SPSS must contain each K-mer exactly once. There's another variant of the problem where you can repeat K-mers, but let's focus on this variant first. Unfortunately, the minimum path cover problem is NP-hard on general graphs. So this reformulation didn't help us much yet. But de Bruijn graphs are a very restricted class of graphs. For example, the shape shown on the slide cannot exist in a node-centric de Bruijn graph, because if we had such a shape, we would have to have an edge from the bottom left to the top right. So the topology of de Bruijn graphs is quite restricted, which leaves us hope that maybe there could be a solution for path covers in a de Bruijn graph, even though it's hard in general graphs. So let us first solve a more simple problem. I call it the spectrum preserving string problem. In this problem we ask whether there exists one string which has exactly the same K-mers as the input, such that we do not have duplicate K-mers. So instead of trying to cover the K-mers of the input with a set of strings, now we are allowed to use just one string, and we want to know whether there exists one string which covers every K-mer of the input exactly once. Now this problem may seem difficult at first, because it corresponds to the Hamiltonian path problem on de Bruijn graphs. So a Hamiltonian path on a graph is a path which visits every node of the graph exactly once. And again, the Hamiltonian path problem is NP-hard on general graphs. But here comes the trick. Instead of having the node-centric de Bruijn graph, where nodes are K-mers and edges are overlaps, we should look at the problem from the point of view of the edge-centric de Bruijn graph. So in the edge-centric de Bruijn graphs, The edges are the k-mers and the nodes are the overlaps. So the role of the edges and the nodes is flipped. Now in the edge-centric de Bruijn graph, the problem becomes the problem of finding an Eulerian path. An Eulerian path is a path which visits every edge of the graph exactly once. And it's been known for at least a century that you can find Eulerian paths on a graph in linear time, which solves our problem. So there is a lesson here, and the lesson is that formalisms matter. So here, by just changing how we define this graph, without changing the problem at all, the problem transforms from this intimidatingly difficult Hamiltonian path problem to the Eulerian path problem, which has known solutions, and the solutions are actually very simple and easy to implement. So this solves the spectrum-preserving string problem. How about the spectrum-preserving string set problem, where instead of a single path, we need to find the smallest path cover, so the smallest set of paths which covers the graph. So this problem is not actually much harder than the previous problem. The solution goes like this. We find the smallest number of edges that need to be added to the graph to make it Eulerian. After this, we compute an Eulerian cycle, and then finally we break the cycle at the arcs that we added. Now the set of paths that remain give the smallest possible spectrum-preserving string set. So let me give an example of how this works. Suppose this is our graph, and now we want to make it Eulerian. For our purposes, Eulerian means that the number of incoming edges to each node equals the number of outgoing edges from the node. So here we have listed the imbalance of each node. The imbalance of a node is defined by the number of incoming edges minus the number of outgoing edges. So for example here, the imbalance of this node is -2 because it has 3 outgoing edges and 1 incoming edge, and 1 minus 3 is -2. So a negative imbalance means that the node has more outgoing edges than incoming, and a positive imbalance means that the node has more incoming edges than outgoing. And an imbalance of 0 means that there's an equal number of incoming and outgoing edges. So the goal here is to make the imbalance of every node into 0. This is done simply by adding edges from the nodes with positive imbalance to nodes with negative imbalance until all of the imbalances have been fixed. For example, we could add these 3 edges here, and now every node has imbalance 0. Next, we compute an Eulerian path, any Eulerian path. This is one example. And then we simply delete those edges which we added in the previous step, so the red edges. And we are left with these paths. And this set of paths will give us the minimum spectrum-preserving string set for the input strings. So this solves the open problem proposed by Rahman and Medvedev and Brinda and others. So how about the variant of the problem where we allow repeated k-mers? So it could be that sometimes if you repeat k-mers in your strings, you might end up with a smaller spectrum-preserving string set in the end, where the size of the set is measured by the total length of the strings in the set. For example, if your graph has this X shape, then the spectrum-preserving string set which does not repeat k-mers will need to have 3 paths, because you cannot cross the middle of the X twice. But if you allow your strings to repeat, they may both take in the middle k-mer, and by doing this, the total size of the strings is actually smaller than the optimum SPSS, which does not repeat k-mers. So there might be something to gain by repeating k-mers. In this work, we show that this problem also can be solved in polynomial time. This problem is very related to the classic directed Chinese postman problem. In that problem, you're given a directed graph, and you need to find the shortest walk which visits every edge of the graph. So a walk can now repeat edges. We use similar techniques that are used for the directed Chinese postman problem and show that we can reduce the SPSS problem with repeats to minimum weight perfect matching. And this is a very well studied problem in computer science. There exist solutions which have running times somewhere between quadratic and cubic. So the worst case of the algorithm is quite bad, but there exists minimum weight perfect matching solvers which work quite well in practical instances. We also show that a simple linear time greedy algorithm gives solutions which are quite close to the optimum. So here is a sample of the experimental results. For data, in this experiment we used 3682 E. coli genomes. And for this data we compare 6 different SPSS implementations. The first one is just UNITIGS. This is the baseline, the most basic SPSS there is. And we normalize the total length and string count in these SPSS such that UNITIGS have length 1 and then everything else is relative to the UNITIGS. So next we have USD-TIGS and ProfASM, which are just UNITIGS stitching methods, as I discussed earlier. Then we have Euler-TIGS, which is the solution which solves the problem without repeats by just making the graph Eulerian and finding the Eulerian cycle. Then we have G-matchtigs and matchtigs. So G-matchtig is the greedy solution for the variant of the problem which allows repeats. And matchtigs is the one which uses the minimum weight perfect matching solver to find the optimum solution. So here we see by just stitching the UNITIGS we can get about 40% smaller in total length, and the number of strings in the solutions goes to about 35 to 32%. But here we see that ProfASM is almost optimal already. So Euler-TIGS is the optimal solution to the problem that ProfASM tries to approximate. And we see that ProfASM is within 1% of the optimum already. So the heuristics work very well in this case. Now then, what happens if we allow repeats? So this is G-matchtigs and matchtigs. We see that indeed we can cut about 8% of the total length of the UNITIGS by allowing repeats, which is worth something. Now then, in the next column we have the string count, and here we see that when we allow repeats, the solution which minimizes the string count does not necessarily minimize the total length. That property only holds if we do not allow repeats. If we allow repeats, then minimizing the string count might make the total length larger. The time and memory of all the tools were similar, except that ProfASM used a lot more time than the other tools. This is due to the implementation of ProfASM not being very optimized compared to the other methods, which use BCOM2 as a pre-processing step, which is highly optimized. The algorithm in ProfASM should be implementable in principle to run in similar time compared to the other tools. So, in conclusion, we have solved the minimum SPSS problem with and without k-mer repeats. We also show that greedy heuristics are already very close to the optimal solution. For applications, these methods could be used for k-mer set compression, obviously, and it could be used to speed up downstream applications which work on these SPSS representations, such as bfrost or SSHash. And I should mention there's some details omitted from this talk, and the biggest detail is reverse complements. So all of this is actually done such that a k-mer is considered equal to its reverse complement. This complicates the problem, but the complication can be modeled using bidirected graphs. This makes the algorithms very tricky to implement, but the core ideas of the algorithm do not change. Thank you for your attention.